Rebecca Thompson fell twice from the Fremont Canyon Bridge. She died both times. The first fall broke her heart. The second broke her neck. Max Lucado, in the book He Still Moves Stones, tells the story. Rebecca was only 18 years old when she and her 11-year-old sister were abducted by a pair of hoodlums near a store in Casper, Wyoming. The two men drove the girls 40 miles southwest to the Fremont Canyon Bridge, a one-lane steel beam structure rising 112 feet above the North Platte River. The two men brutally beat and raped Rebecca. She somehow convinced them not to do the same to her younger sister, Amy. When the men were finished with them, they threw both girls over the bridge into the narrow gorge below. Amy died when she landed on a rock next to the river, but Rebecca ricocheted off of a cliff and into deeper waters. With a hip fractured in 5 places, she struggled to shore. To protect herself from the cold, she wedged herself between 2 rocks and waited for the dawn to come. But the dawn never came for Rebecca Thompson. Oh, she was found. Physicians treated her wounds. The courts imprisoned her attackers. Life went on, but the dawn never came. So in September of 1992, 19 years later, she returned to that bridge. Against her boyfriend's pleadings, she drove 70 miles per hour to the North Platte River. With her 2-year-old daughter and boyfriend by her side, she sat on the edge of the Fremont Canyon Bridge and wept. Through her tears, she retold the story. The boyfriend didn't want the little girl to see her mother cry, so he began carrying the child back to the car. And that's when he heard her body hit the water. And that's when Rebecca Thompson died her second death. The sun never dawned on Rebecca's dark night. But why? Was it fear? Perhaps. She had testified against the two men, pointing them out in a courtroom. During the trial, one of the murderers had taunted her by smirking and sliding his finger across his throat as if to say, "I'll get you." On the day of her death, the two men had been up for parole, so perhaps the fear of a second encounter was just too great. Or was it anger? Anger at her rapists, anger at the parole board, anger at the court system, anger at God, anger at herself? Or was it guilt? Some think so. Despite Rebecca's attractive smile and appealing personality, friends say that she was haunted by the ugly fact that she had survived while her little sister had not. Or was it shame? Everyone she knew and thousands of people she didn't know had heard the humiliating details of her tragedy. She had been raped. She had been violated. She had been shamed. And try as she might to outrun the hurt, she never could. So almost 20 years later, she went back to that bridge. You see, canyons of shame run deep. And although Rebecca was physically rescued from the canyon she was thrown into, she was never able to escape the memory of her past. And some of you deal with something like that. Either your own sin or the sin of someone else. Either something that you did or something that someone else did to you. You can't get past that. And try as you might to outrun the hurt, you just can't. And so sometimes it keeps you up at night. Sometimes you cry yourself to sleep. And these things can bring about anxiety. Our past can dominate our present, and it can destroy our future. And so in this series that we're going through right now, where we're talking about how to win the fight with my anxiety, this is part 3. And we've been focusing on the Lord is my shepherd from the 23rd Psalm. And today we're going to focus on the shepherd who restores. Because I believe that a lot of us need restoration. And until we receive that restoration and that healing from God, it's hard for us to get past our past, and we're going to continue to deal with some anxiety and some things here along the way. Sometimes our anxiety comes from our brokenness. Sometimes it comes from our past. Regardless of how the pain is brought upon, whether it's your doing or someone else's doing, it brings about consequences. But our shepherd can restore us. Did you know that in our country, 1 out of every 5 people are suffering from mental illness? Now, That doesn't necessarily mean that you belong in a mental hospital. What it means is anything from depression to anxiety that is severe enough that it controls your life. A lot of people are struggling with some kind of mental illness. But the powerful thing is that we can get a hold of whatever it is that's controlling us, and we can take back that control with the help of God and lead a life that He wants us to live. So when we go back to Psalm 23, this is what it says in the first few verses. The Lord is my shepherd, I have all that I need. We talked about that last week, that God is our provider who takes care of all our needs. So if your anxiety comes from your lack of faith that God's going to provide, or you're worrying over if He's going to come through for you in certain situations or take care of you financially or physically or what have you, you can be assured that He is a shepherd who provides. In verse 2, it says, He lets me rest in green meadows. He leads me beside peaceful streams. He renews my strength. In the New King James Version, it says, He restores my soul. So He restores, that is, He refreshes, He rebuilds, He refurbishes, He renews, He repairs, He renovates, He fixes up, He brings back to life. And so we're going to focus on this today, that the Lord is the shepherd who restores. And I'm going to give you three specific situations where He restores us. There are plenty of others, but three specific times in our lives when He restores us. And here's number one. The shepherd restores his sheep when they are wounded. And some of you today that are watching this, you are hurting, you are wounded, and you're looking to God for help. Well, I have good news for you, that just as a really good shepherd cares for his sheep, God, the great shepherd, cares for his sheep, us. And He loves us with an everlasting love. And so when we're wounded, He's there to take care of us. In Matthew 9:36, it says that when Jesus, saw the crowds, He had compassion on them because they were confused and helpless like sheep without a shepherd. Now here's the thing. In the Bible, it talks about God as a shepherd, talks about Jesus as a shepherd, talks about us, His people, as sheep. Now why? Sheep are the dumbest animals on the face of the planet. They're totally helpless. They have no sense of direction. They can't take care of themselves. They can't provide for themselves. They certainly can't restore themselves. And so they're completely dependent on their shepherd. You and I are we're like that. We're sheep. We're completely dependent on God. And so that's what I want us to learn in this series, and especially today. There was a construction crew that was building a new road in a rural area, and they were knocking down trees as they went along. And the superintendent noticed one tree that it had a nest in it, and there still were some baby birds that couldn't yet fly. And so he marked the tree and ordered that it not be cut down at that point. Well, several weeks later, the superintendent came back to the tree, and he got into one of those bucket trucks and was lifted up high so that he could look into the nest. And he saw that the little birds were gone. They had learned to fly and moved on. So he ordered the tree cut down. As the tree crashed to the ground, the nest fell clear, and there were little pieces of paper and debris that kind of flowed off. And he noticed that among the pieces of paper was part of a Sunday school pamphlet, and it had these words: He cares for you. Obviously comes from 1 Peter 5:7 that says, give all your worries and cares to God, for He cares about you. And if God cares about just the flowers, and we talked about this last week, the flowers and the birds and things like that, if He cares about those things, how much more does He care about us? And if He's that crazy about us that the book of Isaiah says that He has us inscribed on the palm of His hand, so God has your name tattooed on His hand. If that's the case, then He's crazy about you. You're always on His mind. You're always in His thoughts. And when you're wounded, He's going to care for you. Henry Ward Beecher said, troubles are often the tools by which God fashions us for better things. So I read part of a little booklet that it was written by W.A. Knight, and it talks about the Oriental customs of shepherds. So the eastern part of the world, the shepherds, which would have been the case in Bible days. And here's one of the pictures that it paints. It says, as the sheep return to the fold at the close of the day, the shepherd stands at the opening of the sheep gate and is actually himself the gate. He holds back each sheep while he looks it over for injuries. Olive oil, which is carried in a horn, is placed on a bruise or severe scratch. Additional medication, such as cedar tar, might be used for severe injury. The shepherd dips his large two-handled cup into the container of water, and the sheep may drink cool water from a cup that's literally overflowing. A sheep that is overly tired might find the shepherd rubbing olive oil over its face and head, then splashing cool water over its body, and into the safety of the sheepfold it goes to rest. And so this paints a picture of how shepherds, especially in the days of Christ, cared for their sheep. And in the days of when David, who wrote this, remember, he was a shepherd, so he understood, he knew how all this worked. And so he's painting this picture in this 23rd Psalm, that just as the shepherds that he knew and that he was would care for a sheep when they were wounded, so God, our shepherd, cares for us. He restores us when we're wounded. The second thing is that he restores us when we're weary. Sometimes we're just tired. We run here and there, and we live in a rat race, and we just don't take time to care for ourselves. And we eat fast food like it's crazy, like it's going out of business, and not because it's good, really because it's cheap, but because it's fast, because we're always eating on the run. Our cars have become our dining rooms, right? And so there's the frenetic kind of life that we need, and sometimes we need rest. And especially if you're dealing with some pain from your past, or some anxiety in your life and some worry, sometimes that keeps you up, and sometimes it costs you sleep. And so you need rest. So in Psalm 23:2, David writes, he lets me rest in green meadows. He leads me beside peaceful streams. So we talked about this a little bit last week, that any noise, any disturbance, any intruder would scare sheep. They're very fearful animals. They can't take care of themselves. They can't lie down and relax unless they're completely secure. They won't drink unless they're secure. They won't eat. So here David says that the Lord is my shepherd and that he makes me rest in green meadows. So the emphasis here is on rest. The emphasis is not so much the green meadows where he feeds me, although, as we talked about last week, sometimes that's the case, that God provides for my needs always, and sometimes he has to lead me into the place where he's going to take care of me. But rather, this has to do with rest. So after the sheep have fed, after they've been satisfied, see, they're easily frightened. And if something happens, if an intruder comes in, if it's an animal or some person or something that scares them, sheep will actually start to panic and run, and as they do, they'll run over each other, and they can easily get wounded. But when this happens, the shepherd will actually grab a sheep and gently hold it down until it finally relaxes and starts to eat the grass underneath it. So after a hectic, busy day, sometimes you and I are in the need of rest, and God, our shepherd, provides us that rest. We just have to slow down, and we have to take time to be in a restful place where God can minister to us this way. So it says that not only does he make me rest in green meadows, but he leads me beside peaceful streams. That is, he provides me in peaceful situations. So no matter how thirsty a sheep would get, if the water is moving, he's not going to drink. And so what would happen is the shepherd would take his rod and his staff, and he would move the rocks around to form kind of a little dam so that there would be a space where the waters would become peaceful, where they would become calm, where they wouldn't be running. And those instances, those little dams, were the places where the sheep could then drink. Or maybe he would lead them to a different place where the water wasn't moving. And so what he would do was he would find a place where the sheep could be at peace. And this is the same thing that God does for us. Isaiah 40, verses 28 through 31 says, "Have you never heard? Have you never understood? The Lord is the everlasting God, the creator of all the earth. He never grows weak or weary. No one can measure the depths of his understanding. He gives power to the weak and strength to the powerless. Even youths will become weak and tired, and young men will fall in exhaustion. But those who trust in the Lord will find a new strength. They will soar high on wings like eagles. They will run and not grow weary. They will walk and not faint." And so the point is this, that if I try to live my life without God, I'm going to have plenty of problems in life. If I live my life for God and give my heart over to Him, I'm still going to have problems, but I'm going to have renewed strength. I'm going to have rest for my soul. I'm going to have contentment. I'm going to have a God who's not only taking care of me when I'm wounded, but He's taking care of me when I'm weary. He's going to provide for me. He's going to restore me. All I have to do is give my life over to Him and let Him carry my burden for me. In the Philippines, there was a pastor who told a story about a man who was a driver for a wagon, and he was on his way to the market when he came upon an older man carrying a really heavy load that was just bearing down on him and causing it to be hard for him to walk. So the driver took compassion on the man, and he stopped and invited the old man into the wagon to ride instead of walk. So gratefully, the old man accepted. And as they're going down the road, after a few minutes, the driver turned to make sure the old man was doing okay. And he noticed, to his surprise, that the old man was still carrying that burden on his shoulders. He hadn't yet set it down. And the message of that is that there are times when we have to carry burdens, but there are also times that we have to let them down. That we don't have to live, we don't have to be the perfect parent or the perfect worker all the time. There are times that we need to rest. There are times that we just need to let God take care of us and minister to us. In Matthew 11:28, Jesus said, "Come to me, all you who are weary and carry heavy burdens, and I will give you rest." And so the invitation is, come to me with your burdens, with those things that are weighing you down, and give them to me. I'll carry them for you, and I'll let you rest. And so I hope that you'll take Him up on that opportunity today. So the shepherd restores his sheep when they're wounded. He restores his sheep when they're weary. Number 3, He restores His sheep when they are wandering. Now it's important to know that when David wrote this one-time shepherd who had become the king of Israel was writing this after he himself had been restored for his own wandering. There was this time where David saw this woman named Bathsheba, and she must have been pretty good looking, because David threw away a lot just to be with her. The problem was that Bathsheba was married. And so David not only committed adultery with her, and she ended up, they had sex and she got pregnant. But then guess what happened? Her husband just happened to be in the military. And David arranged it so that her husband in battle was killed. So in effect, he's committed adultery. He's now committed murder. And a time came where he was confronted with what he had done. But he surrendered. And he asked God for forgiveness. And there are plenty of writings in the Psalms where he's just crying out to God. And so when he wrote this, he had been restored for his wandering moment. And sometimes sheep would wander, and they would need to be restored back to the flock. It's important to know that when a sheep strays, it can be very dangerous for that sheep. They can't care for themselves. They easily get lost. And so if a sheep wandered away from the rest of the herd, it was critical that the shepherd find them and get them back. And sometimes restoration would need to take place. Sometimes there would need to be some kind of healing, be it physical, or maybe the sheep would be disciplined in a certain way. But there was always restoration that needed to take place whenever a sheep would stray. And it's the same thing for you and I. Sometimes we stray and we have to be brought back to the herd, back to the family of God. And sometimes we have to be disciplined, and sometimes we have to be taught, sometimes we have to be healed, but always we have to be restored. In Psalm 119, 176, it says, I have wandered away like a lost sheep. In Isaiah 53, 6, it says, all of us like sheep have strayed away. The following notice was spotted in the lost and found section of a newspaper. It said, lost dog, $50 reward, black and tan dog of poodle and German shepherd descent, flea bitten, left hind leg missing, no hair on rump, blind and recently neutered, answers to the name of Lucky. Now that may seem kind of funny, but the dog is lucky because it has an owner who's going to great lengths to find it and bring it home. And we have a shepherd who goes to great lengths to find us and bring us home whenever we stray. Matthew 18, 12 and 13 says, if a man has 100 sheep and one of them wanders away, what will he do? Won't he leave the 99 others on the hills and go out to search for the one that is lost? And if he finds it, I tell you the truth, he will rejoice over it more than the 99 that didn't wander away. So God is crazy about us. He's always searching for his sheep who have gone astray. And if you're one of those today, I want you to know that you can come back to him and that you can be healed, you can be restored. Don't worry about what you did in your past. Sometimes people say, look, you don't know what I've done. God couldn't forgive me. I'm telling you, he can forgive you. He's forgiven me. He's forgiven so many others. It doesn't matter what you did. There's nothing that you can do to make him stop loving you. Nothing. Not one thing. Nothing you can do to ever make God stop loving you. There's a story in the Bible, in the New Testament, in Luke, actually, the book of Luke, chapter 7, about a time where Jesus is eating at the home of a religious leader. And in this situation, people have gathered because everywhere Jesus went, people would flock. And so Jesus is there, and in the room is a woman with a bad reputation. Here's what Luke says in verse 37, Luke 7:37. When a certain immoral woman from that city heard he was eating there, she brought a beautiful alabaster jar filled with expensive perfume. So it doesn't say when an immoral woman, it says when a certain immoral woman, which means everybody knows who she is. Everybody knows what she's done and what she does. She's a prostitute. And so this is a bad girl, right? But she's not bad enough for Jesus. Because at some point, Jesus has been out teaching, and when he's teaching, he's declaring his story of redemption and restoration for people. No matter what you've done, no matter what you've become, there's still hope for you. And at some point, this woman heard this story, and she heard that Jesus was here, and she was filled with hope that maybe she could have a second chance in life. So she came to this place, and as the story says, she kneels at his feet, and she's so overcome with this story and with her sin and the story of redemption that it says that she starts weeping, and her tears fall on his feet. And as she sees them falling on his feet, now she's thinking, oh, what am I going to do now? I have to dry his feet. And so she lets down her hair and starts drying his feet with her hair. This is stunning, because this woman is so moved by his story and by his message that she comes and she's weeping and so humbled that she dries his feet with her hair. Now, Jesus, ultimately, later in the story, he forgives her, tells her to go in peace. Your faith has saved you. And this is the story that I want you to get. That no matter what has happened in your past, whether it's by your own sin or by the sin of someone else, you can move past your past. And that anxiety that you struggle with every day from what happened to you years ago or what happened because of you years ago, you can wipe the slate clean. You can start over. There's forgiveness, there's grace available for you. Dwight Moody said, God never mends, he creates anew. And God wants to create something new within you today. Years ago, there was this man who was walking his little daughter. She was probably 3 or 4 years old, and he realized that he had never told her what to do in case she ever got lost. So he said, look, if you ever get lost, I want you to remember that our house is right next to this church. And on top of this church, you see that big pointy thing? That's a steeple. And on top of that steeple, you see that cross? Well, I want you to remember this cross and remember this church and that steeple. And so if you ever do get lost and you can't find your way home, maybe you can remember the church and you could remember how to get to our house. Well, the day came that the little girl actually did get lost. And people are trying to help her, but she doesn't know her address. She doesn't know what her parents' names. She calls them mommy and daddy. And so there was a policeman there, and he said, okay, we don't know your address. We don't know your parents' names. We don't know your phone number. Is there anything around your house, any landmark or anything like that you can tell us about that might give us an idea of where you live? And she said, yes, my daddy told me about this. He said that if I ever get lost, I need to remember right next to our house, there's this church. And on the top of the church, there's this big pointy thing. I think my daddy said it's called a steeple. And on top of that steeple is a cross. And she looked at the policeman and she said, Mister, if you can get me to that cross, then I can find my way home. And so it is for us today. That if we can just get to the cross, we can find our way home. I'm not saying you have to have the answers now. I'm not saying you have to make any kind of change right now. All I'm saying is that if you can get to the cross, then you can find your way home and you can begin to receive the restoration, because God is a shepherd who restores, and his restoration can help you win the fight with your anxiety. And so I hope that you'll join us next week as we continue this series and continue this journey together. Have a great week. God bless you.